Hi, this is Professor Stugard, and in this video we're going to discuss sampling. So in this lecture video we're going to discuss different methods of sampling, and specifically we're going to talk about bootstrap sampling towards the end and how we can do that in R for our modeling purposes. So first of all, before we can talk about sampling, let's get a few definitions out of the way. When we talk about sampling and we talk about statistics, we're talking about, first of all, we have a population. And again, typically we're trying to describe what's going on in the entire population. And so that's your entire group to be studied. Whether it's all Americans or all women, again, whatever you're trying to describe, that becomes your population. However, you can very rarely ask every single person in your population to answer your poll question or whatever else it is that you're talking about. So you need to rely on a sample, a smaller subset of that population that contains multiple individuals, where an individual is that single member of the population being studied. So again, we can't possibly ask everyone in the population, so we need to rely on a sample, and we hope that our sample is representative enough of the population that, well, when we make our claims, that they're hopefully accurate. Now, when we do talk about this, a parameter is a numerical summary of a population. And again, that's what we're kind of hoping to describe is this population. But again, we can't ask everybody in a population, so we're not going to get full results. So we rely on just our sample. And statistic is our numerical summary of a sample. So again, the mean, the median, the mode, or even the standard deviation or range or stuff like that, those are all statistics based on our sample. And the whole study of statistics is really, well, how do I collect and use these statistics? How accurate are they to describe a population when really all I have is just my sample? So when we do sampling, there's a couple different ways. The most common and the easiest is really the simple random sampling. Basically, the individuals are just chosen from the larger set completely at random. So there's no bias towards picking one person or the other. You have your population, and you're just randomly going to select a few people from that population for your sample and your study. We could also do what's called stratified sampling. And this is where you take your population and you actually subdivide it into subpopulations, which we call strata. So we have different strata, different levels really, and individuals are then chosen equally from each strata. Now, when we create our strata, each strata is similar in some way. The easiest example I can think of is if you want a sample that has an equal amount of men and women, what you would have to do is first take your population and split it up into men, split it up into women, and then choose an equal number from each. That's stratified sampling. You've taken your population, you've subdivided it, and now you're choosing an equal number from each one of those strata. All right? There's also systematic sampling. Again, this is more for probably like medical testing type of stuff where you have your entire population, but you can't look at the entire set of data. And basically what you would do is you order your population and then you choose your sample in some sort of ordered manner from that population that you have put in order. So in this particular example in the picture, we have a population of 11 people. And to choose our sample, we start with the second person, and we're choosing every third person after that. And that's how we create our sample. There's also cluster sampling. And so this is similar, but a bit different than the stratified sampling, where, again, we're taking our population, we're splitting it into groups. In this case, our groups are called clusters. And then you choose an entire cluster at a time. This is really useful if you want to make sure that you're going to be doing the study over and over again and that you don't have any replacement, that you never ask the same person twice. But again, you can separate into clusters and then choose an entire cluster at a time. Now, when we talk about statistics, there's really two types. Again, there's the descriptive statistics, which is organizing and just summarizing data through numerical summaries like the mean, median, mode, or creating tables or making graphs. And you're basically just describing the data. Inferential statistics takes it a step further, and this is where we take our sample, all right, and we take our descriptive statistics, but we also apply probability theory to that sample as it relates to our population, and we, from there, determine how reliable our results would be. So again, this is typical of most studies. They're mostly done with inferential statistics, and this is where you hear things that include margins of error. So again, we expect this to be our result, but we do have this margin of error. because we know that, well, there's always room for, well, random chance. And again, a lot of times this comes with a confidence interval, or it comes with a phrase like, with 95% confidence, the parameter is between this and this. And again, that gives us kind of our guide that, okay, well, this is what our study showed, but we're recognizing that that might not represent the entire population as a whole. And again, you need to combine the statistics with the probability theory to do your inferential statistics. Now, another type of really, really, really important sampling is called bootstrap sampling. Now, bootstrap sampling or bootstrapping is really done on the computer, and it is a computer-intensive approach to statistical inference where your parameters are going to be estimated by, again, treating a set of sample data as your population. So you have your sample, and typically when this happens, you have your sample, but your sample is too small to really make good conclusions. What you're going to do is have the computer take your small sample and pull a bunch of smaller samples out of your original sample with replacement. So again, simple random sampling, you don't put it back in, but with bootstrap sampling you do. You put them back in and then you pull a bunch of new samples. And then each of those new subsamples are compiled into what's called a bootstrap distribution. And the really, really cool and interesting part is that if you do this enough, your bootstrap distribution actually ends up approximating the population data, even if your original sample was too small to do so. So it's a really, really kind of cool idea. But again, the main idea is that you have your small sample, and again, you're going to pull out a bunch of resamples. All right, you're doing resampling, and those resamples are how you're going to create your distribution and come up with your parameter estimates. Now, the great thing about bootstrapping is that it's so simple. It is really straightforward. You have your little sample, pull a bunch of random samples out with replacement. And so again, it's a great way to do statistical inference, to derive things like your standard errors, your confidence intervals, your margins of errors, your distributions, percentiles, proportions, odd ratios, correlation coefficients. It is great for that. And it's also a great way to kind of control and check the stability of your results. Although, again, for most problems, because, again, you have only that small sample, yet it's impossible to know the true confidence interval, it is way more accurate than if you just looked at just that small sample by itself, which is really, really cool. Now, although it's really convenient, and one of the nice parts is you get a bunch of resamples without the cost of having to actually repeat your experiment a bunch of times, it is dependent on that first sample. And if your first sample is a really, really bad sample, then everything that comes out of it is not going to be good either. Again, that's fairly rare, but it is possible. And again, you need a really, really bad sample to begin with for that to be a problem. Now, the main cost associated with bootstrapping is computer resources. Now, for most modern computers, it's not really a large concern. I mean, back not that long ago, you would set up your bootstrap sampling and you might take your computer several hours to work through it. Nowadays, most modern computers work a little bit quicker, so it's not as big of an issue, but it can be an issue sometimes with very, very large bootstrap resampling distributions. Now, to do this in R, if our data set, again, is relatively small and we want to create bootstrap resamples from our training data, we use the bootstraps function. Now, this is part of tidy model, so you will have to load your packages ahead of time, but it's pretty straightforward. You basically pipe your data into the bootstraps function, and it's going to create a whole distribution of a bunch of resamples for you to use later on. All right, so that about wraps it up for this video. So can we answer the first question? First question being, what is a strata in the context of our sampling? When I say a strata, what does that mean? Number two, what is bootstrap sampling? We just talked about it, but what is it? And then lastly, when we do our bootstrap sampling, does it use replacement? Are we putting the things back in or leaving them out? Remember, simple random sampling, we won't want to select the same person twice, or everything should be independent. But what about bootstrap sampling? All right. Hope you had a chance to think about and answer those questions. And as always, take care of yourselves.